Hello and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. I have a very exciting announcement to make. First off, finally getting the Amazon formula. We have to talk about why we changed the title at some point. I know we have a show coming up, Amy, about titling your book, but the redo of How to Sell Books by the Truckload, which has now been renamed the Amazon Formula, is, by the time the show hits, maybe up for pre-order. That's maybe cutting a little close, but we are launching it in early January. And yesterday, Amy and I did a call about it. I'm super excited. The cover rocks. The interior looks great. We're just making some final changes. And then I have to write the book description on Amazon, which always like, oh my gosh, I want to tear my hair out. So authors, if you're struggling to write your book description on Amazon, I feel your pain. But I'm really excited that we're finally here. You know what I mean?
Right?
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
The longest gestation period in the animal kingdom.
Oh my gosh, this book took, and you know what's so funny is I was talking to an author yesterday and she said, I kind of hate my book right now. I'm like, congratulations. That's how you know you're done with your book.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just the craziest thing. Anyway, as a special for listeners, we're going to be doing some cool promo stuff, which we will talk about. We're actually, the last two shows in December are going to be repeat shows. We're taking a little bit of a break, but we are going to be announcing it right after the first of the year. So we are, we're very excited be sure to take a look at the show notes and things like that, because our listeners are going to get some cool things that we're going to be doing to roll out the book as it launches. This show was kind of born from the age-old question of how much should I sell my book for? How should I price my book? And honestly, in the years that I've been doing this, I have seen the gamut from a book. We worked with an author, and he was with I want to say maybe a university press. University presses, because they often, not always, but oftentimes serve a different market. Their books tend to be priced higher. And I want to say that his book was his hardcover book was priced at $59.95 for this book. And honestly, at $60 for a book, that's not a coffee table book. That's not like some massive, whatever. I expect this book to show up at my house and do my laundry and wash my dishes. I mean, so we've seen the gamut of, I'm just going to put my book out there for free to, we had somebody that put, I think, $150 price tag on their book, which even makes the $60 book guy look like a sale, right?
Oh, yeah. We had somebody reach out this week that was very upfront that she's pre-selling her book it's over $250. And it's it's a wellness book. And I had to tell her, like, that's just, you know what I mean? That is such a niche market. We are probably not the right group for you for that kind of, you know what I mean? Like, that was my nice way of saying, this is a conversation she probably doesn't want to have with me,
What was her reasoning for wanting to price the book over at $250? Like, this is the first time, obviously, that Amy has shared this with me. I am floored.
Oh, this is exciting. No, I mean, the book is essentially an extension of her wellness brand. And I think she just genuinely feels that's what her book is worth based on the knowledge she has to impart.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's a problem.
I was actually expecting for longer silence and was thinking we could have the sound guy put in some funny, like, elevator music.
Right? Like, oh, that's such a problem.
Yeah. And I mean, I respect the fact that she's taking herself seriously and she's trying to go places, but, that's going to be a big hurdle, I think, and what's really kind of sad is she may have sold a couple of copies to her very close network that are trying to support her, but that also gives her a false sense of the fact that that's actually going to work when it goes more mass market.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of the problem. I think that And she is not the rule. She's definitely the exception. So we don't necessarily, I mean, it's an interesting anecdote, but I wouldn't, if somebody came to me and said, this is, what I'm pricing my book, I mean, you'd better have and you have a nonfiction book, you better have all kinds of coaching and all kinds of goodies with that book, because I am not spending $250 for a wellness topic, which is very popular, right? It's a very popular, very cluttered market that I could potentially get online.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of that is sort of the problem, which I know we'll get into when we talk about nonfiction books. But let's first talk a little bit about, so authors, when an author comes to, and this is one of the biggest questions that I get in coaching, other than talking about Amazon, they ask me, what should I price my book at? I can't answer that for an author. Almost never. I can tell you what not to do, but the price of the book there's a lot of different factors. So the first factor is, how big is the book? Does it have images? Are there things in the book that are factoring into the price, right? The creation of the book. But the other part of this is anchoring, right? So it's anchoring to, or it's pricing your book to the market, essentially, which is not what this wellness person is doing, not to keep belaboring that, but Amy says this a lot in our shows, is that you're asking for somebody's time, right? So you have to be very and especially if you're a first-time author, that anchoring it to whatever the average price is going on in your market. If you're a first-time author, I don't know that I would necessarily price your book compared to somebody who's been out there forever and has a ton of books and a huge platform. And let me say this up front. And Amy, I want you to, I know, Amy, we both have strong feelings about this. I'm not a fan of cheap books. This is not a conversation about, hey, make your book free or 99 cents. Hugely not a fan of that. I think that has had its time. And I think that time is gone. I mean, I think that, could you make your book free for a day as a promo? Yeah, sure, fine, whatever. If I'm doing an ebook promo for my new book, I am not making it free. Full stop, right? I'm not doing that. I'm also not marking it down to 99 cents. I think if you have a book that's, maybe you have a book that you wrote 15 years ago, you could mark, and you could mark that down to 99 cents because now it's much older. But it also depends on a lot of factors. If that 15-year-old book has, 20,000 reviews, would I sell that for 99 cents? 10,000% I would not do that.
Right.
Amy, give me your thoughts on the pricing conundrum.
I know, on the inexpensive books for sure. I think a lot of people now, like you said, Penny, we talk about it a lot. We talk about it with potential clients, with current clients that, when they get frustrated about sales and they're like, I'm not selling enough, but it's like, it's very easy to forget that books are really not that expensive in the big scheme of things, most of them. It really is the amount of time somebody has to dedicate. If they click buy, it's because they intend on reading it. I mean, that's what most of us do, and if you intend on reading it, that means you're spending multiple hours of your life dedicated to this book. I mean, it's a big concept,
Yeah.
So I think that absolutely comes into play. So the pricing thing, when people price their books super cheap, like you said, nowadays, that's just really not a thing because people aren't enticed necessarily, I don't think, by 99-cent books anymore. And I think we read at one point, Penny, this was a couple years ago now, so I'd like to find some updated data on it, but we found some data that said the highest volume of Kindle books on Amazon is purchased at the $3.99 price point, which I found really interesting, but not all that surprising.
Yeah.
I think $3.99 is still certainly within the impulse purchase, you know what I mean? Area of price points, but it also is not so inexpensive that it potentially negates the quality and the value of your book either.
Right. Right. I think $3.99, I think $5.99. I think those are, I think if you're, again, if you're just starting, and we're talking about ebook pricing, because I don't think print book is always going to ratchet up higher just by nature of the cost of printing, et cetera. Here's the other thing to consider too, is the perceived value of the book. So you look at the category, right? So like, for example, historical fiction books tend to cost more than genre fiction, just in general. And also because historical fiction oftentimes they tend to be bigger books as well. If you're in a nonfiction market, like real estate books, anything involving learning tends to be a little bit more expensive. But the other thing is the perceived value, right? So beyond the genre, the perceived value of the book, and this is where we've talked about this a lot. So if you have some time over the holidays to go back through some of the older shows, we talk about the importance of the Amazon book page. We also talk about the importance of the cover, which I know we've done the show a lot, but on the importance of a good book cover. But the perception of the reader the perception of the reader comes from the book cover and the Amazon book page, and whether or not you have A+ content, and about reviews, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the perceived value. So if you're going to charge, $19.95 for your paperback book, the perceived value of your Amazon book page and your cover, and your book description and all of the A+ content, everything had better be up there, because now you're on the high end of what I would consider a paperback book. But again, it also depends a little bit on the genre, right? Mm-hmm. And reviews, I mean, as a consumer, Amy, when you're looking at books to buy, the reviews also factor in. I mean, I think if you have a book and it's, newly up on Amazon and there's no reviews yet, mm-hmm, the higher the book price becomes a harder ask too. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if a book has a lot of really positive reviews, and clearly it's a genre I already read in, I will every single time pay a little bit more than what I think, my standard book price is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Honestly, Penny, this has happened very recently with books that were recommended to me by people that I trust, know what kind of books I like. I know that they read similar books to my, you know what I mean? And they've recommended books like, dang, because it's a new release and it's popular. It's like, this is more than I normally pay for a book, but you know what? They've recommended it. I trust that. I'm going to do it,
right.
And that's a huge deal too. So that word of mouth, makes a big difference as well. But that usually goes hand in hand with positive reviews. If you're getting positive reviews, you're probably getting positive word of mouth as well. And you can afford to charge more, and people are probably going to pay it. But yeah, going for that premium price with a brand new book, or even, insert gasp, a book that's getting slightly older that doesn't have very many reviews, that gets even more challenging, I think. If a book is starting to age a little bit and doesn't have the feedback from readers that it should for how old it is, that'll also make potential buyers think twice.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's why we always encourage authors to continually get reviews for your book. Mm-hmm. That's definitely important. You want to keep, because even a book that is 10 years old or more, if it has current reviews, it's going to feel current to the reader, right?
Right.
Now, but that is also, reviews do take time. Like, we get it. It's not always easy. Authors will ask, should you price your book at full price at launch? And the answer to that is it kind of depends. And it also depends a little bit on Amazon, because Amazon for a while, so if you put your book, for example, up for pre-order, and let's say you put your ebook up for pre-order at $7.99 or something, and you want to do a discounted pre-order for that period to encourage pre-order buys, et cetera, Amazon locks that price in, I want to say, for 6 weeks or so. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to do a lower price early on, just know that you may be stuck with that price for a while, so be careful with that, right? Be careful with those. So to all of you who really like those really cheap, the 99 cents, again, I don't mean to bang this drum all over again, but you got to be careful with your pricing. Now, you could also do something like creative pricing too. So we see $9.99 a lot because it feels cheaper than $10, even though it's just a penny off. But you could also you don't have to do $9.99. You could do $9.59. You could do $9.23. You could do, what happens with creative price ends is it stops the mind a little bit and it gets people's attention. Like $9.23 feels even cheaper than $9.99, which technically it is, but not by a lot. Right.
It's like the gas stations that are competing and they're 2 cents different. And we think we're getting such a great deal by saving an additional 43 cents or whatever.
I know. Right. Exactly.
But you still go to the cheaper one, right?
But you still go to the guy who's 2 cents. I know. Right. Who's 2 cents cheaper. You know what I mean? Even though you wait and probably in line for a while,
right, exactly.
You're eating up that 2 cent profit just in sitting there. But I think that, have you seen that much on Amazon, by the way, that creative book pricing? I mean, like the $9.23 or 59 or something like that. Do you see that a lot?
I will say, honestly, I notice it more for print than I do for ebooks.
Yeah.
I feel like I see it on print books a lot more. And I always wonder if the author did that intentionally or if it's just some like Amazon stuff,
Yeah.
going on behind the scenes. I think maybe because ebooks, most of them are already, below that kind of, they're not trying to ask too much for it anyway.
Right.
So they're just trying to get them out the door. But I do see it for print books. And that is interesting that you bring that up, because I always am curious, like, I wonder if they're doing this on purpose or if it's just Amazon doing its Amazon sales thing,
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I think that, just to kind of dig into I know we sort of started with a couple of nonfiction examples. It's very easy to get caught up, kind of like this $250 book author that you mentioned. It's easy to get caught up in your consulting rate versus a reasonable price for a book. And I get that completely, because I write books about book marketing. My consulting rate and the cost of buying my books is vastly different. But you also have to realize that if you are a nonfiction author and your book is tethered to your business, your book is your business card, right? So it's a door opener. Maybe it drives business to your business. So it's a little bit different. But again, I'm not, I love people who are rule breakers, but I think the rules for fiction and nonfiction apply across the board. You want to price it to market. You want to price it, so that it has value. And the other thing to consider too, because we've seen this and we saw this, I think certainly in the last 2 years, is authors who are printing books who don't take into consideration things like color interiors, very heavy paper stock, very challenging books, maybe spiral bound, things like that end up driving the price for the book up so much that you have no choice but to price this book at $100 or something. And it's a lose-lose. So I know many of you, or if you're doing independent publishing, this isn't something that you ever, that these aren't waters that you have to navigate through necessarily. But if you are listening to this and you're thinking about doing an offset print run, you have a book that has a lot of color interiors, maybe it's a coffee table book or whatever it is, consider the cost of the printing early on into the cost of the book, because you cannot reverse engineer book pricing. And we've seen that a lot, right, Amy?
Oh yeah. It's usually way too late, unfortunately.
It's way too late once once you're looking at the, so I hope that this has been helpful. I mean, I'm trying to look through our notes to see, did we overlook anything that we,
I think I think we say it a lot, Penny, but I think we should still share kind of our standard. It seems very simple, but the fact that it comes up a lot, I think it's worth repeating ourselves, kind of our standard, cheat sheet for researching, kind of the market research for figuring out where to price your book.
Yeah.
So doing those Amazon comparisons, going to the bestseller lists. I think a lot of authors are surprised when they actually start doing that bestseller list research, because I think there's this, especially for newer authors, I think there's this concept that big names ask for more money, or people that are selling a lot of books or that are hitting, are on the bestseller list for a few weeks get to demand a lot more money. And I think they're often surprised that big names are pricing their books with all of us regular people. You know what I mean? Most of the time. And even though books are on the bestseller list, they are still they want to remain competitive. You don't often get on the bestseller list and see wildly out of place pricing for a book on the list. At least I don't. Do you ever see that, Penny? I mean, commonly?
No, but I do see authors, but I think to the point of perceived value. Like you said, so the friend who recommended the book, and the book was priced more than you would normally pay, but the book had lots of reviews. The book page looked great. The book now has a higher perceived value. And also what weighs into that is a recommendation from a friend. Mm-hmm. So I don't see books that hit the bestseller list. And you're right. This is a very surprising exercise for a lot of authors. Books that hit the bestseller list are typically priced, pretty average. Some maybe a tiny bit higher, but nothing like, a book that's priced at, let's say, $19.95 versus a book that's priced at $45. Like you would never see that.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think sometimes authors are a little disappointed that that's what we say. It's like, no, it's actually a relatively simple formula, at least to get your book out the door. And I think that's something too, is that your price, especially if you have control over it. And I know sometimes with some publishing contracts, there's more to it than that. But your price doesn't have to be static for the life of your book either.
Right.
Exactly. And I think a lot of authors put a lot of pressure on themselves to get the pricing exactly right. And it's like, I get it in terms of the things that we've already discussed that you could do to really kind of sink your book right away if you've completely priced yourself out of the market. But otherwise, there is time, to test out different price points as your book stays on the market longer, and based on the reviews that come in and a lot of elements, Yeah. So I think authors also should kind of take a deep breath to some degree and try to put yourself right in that sweet spot of where you're seeing other comps on bestseller lists and things like that. And then, put a reminder, add it as part of your marketing plan and your branding plan to check in with your pricing and see if, 6 months from now, if it's still where it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that's definitely, smart. Prices definitely can fluctuate. The other thing, and I think a couple of the final points that we want to make is, and I hear this a lot too from authors, I want to price my book so that I earn back everything that I've invested in it thus far. Right. So they price their book. So the thought process is they price their book at $45 or whatever, because they're doing the math and they're like, well, okay, so if I make 30% off of Amazon or whatever, then then all I have to do is sell 1,000 books and I've earned back everything that I've invested in this book. When you do that, you will not sell any books. I don't really know how to put that nicely. Like, yeah. You will not sell any books doing it that way. Because the psychology is reversed, right?
Exactly.
And it's hard to explain that when somebody is kind of stuck on that, like, that's what I want to do with my, my book pricing, and I want to earn it back, and I want my book to earn back. And I've had conversations with authors where I'm like, okay, but this is not going to get you where you need to be. And they're like, no, this is going to work. I'm like, okay. And that at the end of the day, that's all we can say. Like, well, that's your book. So if you want to price it so that nobody wants to buy it, that's entirely your call. Now, we're focused very much on Amazon, and I get it because Amazon is probably the easiest place for all of us to sell our books versus our website. But I do know some authors, if you want to create like special edition books, autographed books, books with, maybe sell the, hardcover books as special editions and things that you could potentially sell from your website. But before you start to truck down that road, it's important to know that you got to have some traffic to your website first. I mean, you have to have invested some time in your website, driving traffic and getting people to your website, because otherwise you're going to create this limited edition. Like, well, okay, so I can't price my book. Like, I have to stay within the Amazon genre boundaries for my book on Amazon, but I can sell a limited edition for a whole lot more. And it's the holidays and I can make a lot of money and blah, blah, blah. But you need to have a structure in place in order to do that.
Yes.
So that's something else to consider. And I think, Amy, we talked about this when we were in the green room, and I'm just going to let Amy run with this because she's going to have a lot of fun with this. We also see a lot of bad advice with regards to pricing books. And I'm trying not to lead the conversation too much.
No, it's okay.
You know what I'm talking about. You laughed. I was just like, Amy, we have to record now. She's like, my face hurts.
It did. My face was hurting from laughing. So yeah, I mean, bad advice or just unrealistic advice. And that's why I understand why it can be frustrating for authors when they're trying to figure all this out on their own, because we say it all the time, no two author situations or journeys and goal sets and things like that are going to be exactly the same. There's just too many factors that come into play. So it gets really hard trying to figure out the right thing and the wrong thing to do, because it a lot of what's out there kind of dumps everybody into the same bucket. I think, Penny,
right.
Like, this applies to all of you, run with it. These are the exact right things to do. And I can understand why some authors reading some of these tips and things, it's like, well, shit, clearly they're not talking to me. But one of the tips that we saw that I almost fell out of my chair laughing about was that you should brag about the number of sales and put that as part of your book description or as a call out on your book cover. And their example was 10,000 copies sold. And that would give you a reason to price your book higher. And I thought, well, yeah, that sounds amazing on so many levels. One, clearly you've already sold well over 10,000 books if you're bothering to put that printed on your book cover and on your Amazon description. But I just couldn't believe that. And no wonder, again, it's so confusing for authors to figure out what the right information and wrong information is out there, because wouldn't that just be a high quality problem to have, Penny, is if everybody could just price their books higher because they've sold over 10,000 copies?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I've seen books that have 10,000 copies sold worldwide or 1 million copies sold worldwide or things like that. But I don't see that a lot on books, actually. And I don't know that necessarily, I don't know that putting the number of books sold on your book speaks to now you can price your book higher versus people who just really like this book. You know what I mean? That's kind of a weird, I thought that was a little bit of a weird recommendation too. I was like, wow.
Yeah, it was such a weird tip. It seemed very tone deaf and
yeah.
What the rest of the tips in the article made a lot of sense. And then that one when we were like, okay, what's the information out there? Because we always like to see what else is out there, because a lot of what we talk about on the podcast episodes as well is trying to clarify some of the misinformation out there. So, but yeah, I think the 10,000 copies sold thing is almost exclusively for books that are in, airports nowadays. And those are all of 15 different authors, I think, at this point.
I know it. Well, I hope that this has been helpful as you're considering, you're a new book launch for the new year and how to price your book, or for an existing book that you think, is not really moving the needle. Maybe take a look at the book pricing and do some comparative checking book pricing is very fluid. So it's always good to be flexible and to see what the competition is doing. Thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said, we're going to have some more information on the release of the Amazon formula, which I'm super excited about. I wish you all a very great holiday, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, because we are not going to really have another show until right after the first of the year, but we will see you then. We appreciate show ideas. We've had a couple of really great show ideas recently. And we appreciate a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye.